Why am I using this toxic, poisonous, highly invasive weed to improve our farm soils and grow better beef? With good reason, people are scared of it. But if used properly, it can be a wildly beneficial plant. I'm Rod from Dowdle Family Farms, and in this video, I'm gonna move our brood cow herd onto this fescue pasture that's infested with a bunch of Johnsongrass. And it is one of the most misunderstood and even controversial weeds in southern pastures especially. It's invasive, and under certain conditions, it's toxic, and if not managed properly, it can wreak havoc on your cow herd. On the other hand, if it's managed properly, you can increase the weight gain on your herd, increase the soil health on your farm, while also controlling it in your pastures. And in this video, let's talk about the Johnsongrass paradox. So this paddock is in our red field over here on the farm, and it's predominantly a cool season 50-acre fescue pasture. But over the years, we've been interseeded with some Guarana white clover. And this last fall, I also added some red clover and chicory in here as well. But over the last couple of years, this Johnsongrass has started coming up through the stand. Now, it bears some resemblance to sorghum Sudan grass, which is one of the cover crops that I grow not only for our cows and our pigs. And oftentimes people look at that sorghum Sudan grass and think it's the same thing as this Johnsongrass. But there are some very unique characteristics to Johnsongrass, to the other sorghum type species of grasses. But before we look further, let's go get the cows. Now, most livestock producers despise Johnsongrass because they're worried primarily about two different things: prussic acid poisoning and nitrate poisoning. Prussic acid poisoning normally occurs when you have any of the sorghum or sorghum Sudan grass species, whether it's Johnsongrass, which is sorghum, I'll put the scientific name up, how about that? Or whether it's forage sorghum or a hybrid sorghum Sudan grass. And what happens is when the plants are stressed, usually it's in their early growth or right after they've grazed and are regrowing, in frost conditions, or during extreme drought, which is a little ironic because these plants are phenomenal performers during drought. But once they're stressed too far by drought, they can create prussic acid, which from my understanding turns into a cyanide in the rumen of cows. Now, for producers that are familiar with managing sorghum Sudan grass or forage sorghum or something like that, there's not that big of a deal. And the other problem that livestock producers tend to have with Johnsongrass is nitrate poisoning. From my understanding, nitrate poisoning normally occurs when you have synthetic fertilizers and it builds up inside the plant walls. And then as the livestock graze it, it removes the oxygen from their blood, in simple layman's terms. And for anyone not familiar with grazing these kind of grasses, it can be a little intimidating, but at the same time, on a very practical level, if you just take some very basic precautions when grazing, the risk is very low. Now, hay producers typically do not like Johnsongrass for a couple of reasons, primarily because, like many of the sorghums, it has a thicker stem, it's harder to dry down. Many people don't want it going to seed in their hay because then it spreads. And again, now a lot of naturalists or wildlife enthusiasts despise the stuff for a fairly good reason, because Johnsongrass can outcompete native grasses, and those native grasses are usually essential habitat for both pollinators, birds, ground nesting birds like quail and small mammals. So Johnsongrass forms those thick monoculture stands, if it's not managed carefully, that can overcrowd the diversity of plants that wildlife need to survive. Now, as you can tell, this right now is not an overly thick stand. The Johnsongrass is in here, and of course the cows have grazed it. But we still have our fescue that's growing down here in the bottom. Johnsongrass is incredibly persistent. One plant can produce up to 80,000 seeds a year. Its rhizomes are basically underground survival bunkers, storing lots of energy to help them survive the cold weather and come out in the spring. So we don't plant it and we don't promote it. However, if we had 50 acres of Johnsongrass, we'd have more summer grasses than we could handle for our herd of brood cows, their babies, and those that we're fattening out. And it performs very well with no additional synthetic fertilizer inputs or anything like that. It can produce a ton of biomass And that biomass helps increase organic matter as the cattle graze it, as we mow it and let it regrow, however it's managed. After all, that's the role that we do with our sorghum Sudan grasses or annuals. They do have very persistent rhizomes, but they die at the end of the growing season. So we do have to go back and plant them every year, and that's one of the downfalls of having annual cover crops that we have to plant. But right now it's wildly beneficial because our fescue is starting to go to seed. This field is rather thin. It's got some other weedy grasses in there. But even in our best cool season pastures with tall fescue, white clover, red clover, Boston plantain, chicory, and other cool season forages that not only provide a lot of phenomenal forage for our livestock, they tend to peter out as the hot summers grow. And so right now in mid-May, we've still had a very wet spring. We still have decent fescue growth and clover growth. But as those forages are fading away, the Johnsongrass is growing, and it provides an excellent forage for our cattle when we get into that summer slump of hot, dry weather that our cool season forages don't perform well in. And the kicker is we get all that benefit from the Johnsongrass without planting a seed, without any synthetic fertilizers or herbicides. So part of that management right now is grazing the Johnsongrass while it's still in its vegetative state before it's gone to seed. And of course the cows are grazing the Johnsongrass, the clovers, the plantain, the chicory, and the tall fescue. So they're going to be in this field for a while. Now there's plenty of literature out there about how you can graze Johnsongrass along with other sorghum species to limit the impact of prussic acid poisoning or nitrate poisoning. Essentially you just graze it before or after those times where it's stressed and don't give it a whole lot of added fertility. So we're using higher stocking densities for shorter periods of time, but also as that grass grows, we want to weaken the stand so that it's not going to be just a solid 50 acres of Johnsongrass eventually that spreads, but not only through seeds, but also through rhizomes in our pastures. So every time the cattle graze it, it weakens those rhizomes and sets it back even further. Even though this video is not necessarily targeting livestock producers who are trying to get rid of Johnsongrass, there may be some watching, and let me just say, don't blindly copy how I'm grazing it. After all, we have been grazing sorghum Sudan grass, very similar grazing management style over the last 5 or 6 years. Do a little bit of research, take your time, investigate. I think you'll find that you can graze the Johnsongrass, weaken the rhizomes, and limit the impact that the stand has and the spread of it on your place as well. Ultimately, this is about grazing not just one weed, but many weeds at a time to help manage them. And to be honest with you, many of the weeds in our pastures, the dandelion, the plantain, the dock, all of these things can be wildly nutritious and also very beneficial for soil health as well.